Civil War was the deadliest conflict in United States history. After it, Americans began to gather in the spring on days of remembrance all across the country. They closed their businesses, flew flags, recited prayers, and decorated graves with flowers in tribute to fallen soldiers. On May 5th, 1868, General John A. Logan called for an official day of remembrance. He proclaimed that the 30th of May, 1868, is designated for the purpose of strewing with flowers or otherwise decorating the graves of comrades who died in defense of their country during the late rebellion, and whose bodies now lie in almost every city, village, and hamlet churchyard in the land. This day was called Decoration Day, and on its first official celebration, General James Garfield made a speech at Arlington National Cemetery, and 5,000 participants decorated the graves of the 20,000 Union and Confederate soldiers buried there. It seems to me that Decoration Day continued the work of healing and reconciliation that our great President Lincoln guided us towards in his second inaugural address. The war wasn't over when he gave it, but he knew the North was going to win. He could have made a speech about the righteousness of the Union and the wickedness of the Confederacy, but instead he said, "With malice towards none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations." Now in time, Decoration Day began to be called Memorial Day, and it recognizes not just the Civil War dead, but the fallen of all U.S. wars, an unbroken line of military service. And Memorial Day is a fitting name, in memory, in remembrance of the dead. And that is why we are gathered here in a cemetery with our dead. We are performing the duty of recollection. We are remembering our history and those who bought our presence at a great price. And our present is an odd time in that our history has become an issue of contention. It is the fashion to criticize and denounce the lives and deeds of our ancestors, of our forefathers who built and defended our country and our very civilization. There is a kind of prejudice called presentism, the notion that people in the present are smarter, wiser, and of course more moral than the people who came before us. In this way of thinking, there is a special focus on the moral failings, the sins of our forefathers, almost as if doing wrong was all that they did. And to be fair to the argument, many of our forefathers did some truly terrible things. And wickedness does transmit itself over time. It doesn't fade immediately. It is, as Scripture says, the iniquity of the father is visited upon the children to the third and fourth generations. And it is also true that the settled conclusions of one's time do not excuse every fault, because in every age there are men and women of conscience who see beyond the conventional thinking of their time that rationalizes evil practices and institutions. They are guided by something higher, and they struggle against the injustices of their age. These are moral heroes. But before we judge our forebears, whether they be ordinary people or moral heroes, we should bear in mind that the conditions that they lived under, their very struggle for survival, is unimaginable to most Americans living today. Our forefathers suffered war, famine, plague, oppression, economic depression, death in childbirth, and almost unbearable living and working conditions. Before we judge them harshly, we should acknowledge that they were struggling to survive, and that we in our soft time are the beneficiaries of their struggles. And we also benefit from the ideas that our forebears developed. Their sacrifices, the blood they shed, theirs and others, the faith they kept alive, the political and social framework they established, and the wisdom and traditions they passed down. Our American founding fathers made a system that is good as any that man has made, and left it open to amendment. And they enshrined freedom of speech, which allows us to amend. Our culture and our moral capital is an inheritance of our forefathers, a gift from them. It shapes us, gives us the words we use, the ideas that sustain us, and it oppresses and mangles us a bit, to be sure. It isn't perfect. Nothing made by the mind and hand of man can be. But it shields us against the chaos and malevolence that lurks both outside our borders and inside our hearts. They made America a light on a hill. It is a light which we need to tend as our servicemen have, each in our small way, not dim or extinguish. Few of us have been touched by the terrible things that our forebears face. Make no mistake, our ancestors, all of them, were survivors. You would not be here if most of your ancestors did not have something clever, something tough, something wise, something visionary, or something heroic in them. And of course, there were plenty of rascals, fools, and villains in your family tree too. So don't get too cocky. You probably run into some of that type at family reunions. You know who I'm talking about. But it is a mistake to focus exclusively on the flaws of our forefathers and claim a cheap moral virtue. Instead, we should be humbled by their courage and accomplishments, and yes, acknowledge their human failings. In doing this, we must keep in mind that moral failing is never something that is exclusively outside of us, in those people, in that group, in the other party, that it is only something that our benighted forebears suffered from. The writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn was correct when he wrote, "The line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart and through all human hearts." The truth is that the blood of both sinners and saints, villains and heroes, runs in your veins. They are why you are here. And flawed and magnificent people founded our country and served in uniform, preserving it against deadly threats. Critics of our history and of our people would tell us that there really aren't any heroes. They would tear down all the monuments, change all the names, and unperson our heroes, casting them into an Orwellian memory hole. They are wrong about heroes, and they are wrong to lose faith in America. Those who have bet against America and her champions have always wagered poorly. There are heroes here among us, both here in this crowd and under this hallowed ground, and they believe in America. Now I'm going to tell you something that you already know. When you love someone or something, you can't precisely fix it. And you shouldn't withhold your love until it magically becomes perfect. Those of you who are married should have learned that long before now. No, you can't fix something that you love. You have to give yourself over to it. You can only devote time and attention to it, and sometimes give your life to it. Patriotism, properly understood, is this kind of love. There are many patriots buried here in this peaceful place, which was founded in 1893. It was originally called the St. Paul Cemetery. Later it was called the Forest Cemetery, and finally the Forest Lawn Cemetery and Mausoleum. Here are buried some early Minnesotans, and if you walk around, you'll see unusual gravestones from the Victorian era. There are symbols of tree stumps, which means a life was cut short, or broken branches, meaning a close relative had died first. Wheat or corn, meaning a long life and being prepared for the divine harvest. And of course, there are veterans buried here, gathered round yonder flagpole as they tend to do. There are veterans here from the Civil War, the Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and even Iraq. One of them is Jacob N. Dodge, who fought for the Union in our Civil War. His obituary read in part, Jacob joined Company G, 11th Regiment, Wisconsin Volunteer Infantry. He was a corporal and then a sergeant. He served throughout the Civil War and was wounded in the siege of Vicksburg, losing the sight in one eye and the hearing in one ear. It was an act of God, he often said, that saved his life at Vicksburg. 14 soldiers went over the top of a ridge, and only he came back. Other veterans are here, men who served in uniform but not in wars, and there are yet others who we do not know, whose grave sites are shown on old maps, but whose markers have faded away. Unknown soldiers whose names and deeds are lost in time. Now, I could just say that these men died having served God and country or the cause, and most certainly for their fellow soldiers. Military service can form a brotherhood that is impossible for those outside of it to understand. And risking yourself for your brother is what really happens on the battlefield. It is as the good book teaches us, greater love hath no man than this, that one lay down his life for his friends. But those trite words almost make too immortal, too superhuman our departed veterans. I want you to understand that they were flesh and blood, living human beings. They had hopes and dreams. They loved and were loved. They laughed and cursed. They knew fear, loss, suffering, and failure. They were sinners and saints, sometimes both. They walked this land and breathed the same air as you and I, and now they are forever silent. We are here to honor them. We preserve their memory. That is the meaning of this place and of today. Now, the work of our departed veterans is done. They are beyond the veil in a place that knows neither fear nor loss. They are gone, but they still form a sacred bond, an unbroken line with the servicemen and women of today, our living veterans. Our living veterans have defended us against fascism and Imperial Japan, against the communists, against the provocation of Middle Eastern foes, and against terrorists. Who here is a veteran? Raise your hand. Thank you for your service. And as we gather here today, there are men and women in uniform, our best Americans, right now in hot, wet, dry, and dusty places, defending us against Islamic radicals, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, and ISIS. And there are other servicemen on ships, in the air, and on the ground, sending a clear message with their presence and posture to possible foes in Russia, Iran, North Korea, and China. These are serious people, and they are watching us and constantly testing our resolve. We can't afford to indulge in the fantasy that history is arcing towards justice. History is being made by us right now, sometimes in fire and blood. And whether it is towards justice or something else depends on us. We also should not patronize our foes by thinking that our conflicts are all misunderstandings. When the Taliban poisons the West with heroin and says that girls should not be educated, they mean it. When ISIS destroys historical monuments, our human heritage, when they exterminate and enslave minorities, they are in earnest. When Al-Shabaab kills civilians indiscriminately with a car bomb, or when Boko Haram kidnaps schoolgirls, we're not misunderstanding their intentions. When Al-Qaeda seeks material for chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons, they plan to use them. Innocent people have been murdered for going to a concert, a cafe, a nightclub, going to school or work, or worshiping in a church, mosque, synagogue, or temple. New York, New Delhi, Bali, Madrid, Beslan, Amsterdam, London, Sharm el-Sheikh, Paris, Moscow, Lahore, Baghdad, Nairobi, Borno, Mogadishu, Copenhagen, Bardo, Jalalabad, San Bernardino, Berlin, Stockholm, Boston, Manchester, Colombo, and so many more mass murders that we forget. Their goal is to intimidate us and ultimately replace our system and our way of life with something monstrous. With this kind of enemy, this kind of evil, there can be no real peace. And in time, either us or them must be turned to ashes. Carthago delenda est. For these enemies, we need both our traditional allies and our friends in the Islamic world. We all have suffered from the wickedness of extremists. We are strong, but we can't do it alone. America is the leader of the free world, but we have to provide a vision and raise up leaders of intellect and character worthy of being followed. Defending America and freedom has a price in blood. We have lost 6,975 servicemen since 9/11. And for some of us, the war doesn't end when we return home. One of the tragedies of war is that some of us don't make it home, and some don't make it even after they get home. On the enemy's best day at the height of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, they could not kill the 23 servicemen we lose every day to suicide. Every day we lose some of our best Americans, our sons and daughters, our brothers and sisters, parents of children, and our friends, men and women suffering from spiritual wounds that we cannot see. The families of fallen servicemen, some of whom are here today, bear an unbearable loss. I am aware of how inadequate anything I might say about your loss must be, how bitter the pride you feel, but still I offer condolence at such a costly sacrifice laid on the altar of freedom, knowing that no thanks can ever be enough. And yet, the need for military service, for warriors, for the unbroken line continues. It is, as Santayana said, only the dead have seen the end of war. This sacred bond, the unbroken line of service, is between our fallen veterans, our living veterans, and our future veterans. No, military service is not entirely fashionable these days, but that's okay. A lot of true, good, and noble things are unfashionable. Some of you young people may feel something stir in you today. Maybe when the flag goes by, you stand a little straighter. Maybe something I said today rings true. Maybe you have a family member who served whom you always admired. Perhaps walking these grounds makes you feel that there is something deeper being called forth in you. That stirring is the call of duty. It is the seed of something great in you. It is the same seed that grew in those we honor here today. If you feel that call today, you could become a future soldier, Coast Guardsman, sailor, airman, or if you are especially troublesome, one of America's Spartans, a U.S. Marine. If you choose to serve, it is unlikely that you will ever regret it. In fact, some of the proudest days of your life will be in uniform. If you serve, you will face challenges and enemies both predictable and now unimagined. You may or may not become a hero, but you will serve with heroes, and you will join the unbroken line that started with those whose lives we remember here today. The men and women that we honor today believed America was an amazing place, a light on a hill, worth serving, worth dying for if need be. They were right. We have something here worth preserving, not pulling apart or deconstructing with inflated notions of our own wisdom. It is so easy to ruin something and so difficult to build something functional, something good, something we have here. Men and women buried here believed that our country and the idea of it was worth their service, and many lost their lives for her. They believed America was worthy of their sacrifice, but are we worthy of theirs? Are we worthy of their sacrifice? In this life, we see through a glass, but darkly, and our path forward is not always clear. But this much I know to do. Decorate some graves, pray together, honor our warriors as you should. It is worth doing, and I commend you for being here, for remembering. But I believe our dead need us to do something more. Honor them here today, but leaving here, aim to make yourself more worthy of their sacrifice, more worthy of their gift. Reconcile with someone. Forgive. Really listen. Be more truthful, humble, generous, patient, and courageous. Mentor a young person. Raise your children with discipline and love. Honor your parents. Build something worthwhile. Mend something broken. Call someone who is lonely and forgotten. Thank a veteran. Visit an elderly person. Comfort the orphan and the widow, and pray and listen to God. Aim towards something higher than your poor, flawed self. Do these things with the little time you have left. All of us will be in a place like this in the blink of an eye. Memento mori. Remember, man, that thou shalt die. Strive to be more worthy of their sacrifice before you join them. The veterans whom we honor today lent themselves to something higher, and in spite of their imperfections, they succeeded. They defended us against deadly enemies and protected this light on a hill. An unbroken line of heroes has protected our country and our ideals, and the world is better for it. They were worthy. How can we do less? God bless our veterans, living and dead. God bless you all. God bless America, and Semper Fidelis.
Thank you, Major Hage, and thank you for your service as well. All right, Mary Weir will lead us in singing America. My